Welcome to H2K Infosys. H2K Infosys is a e-verify business based in Atlanta, Georgia, United States. We provide 100% job-oriented, instructor-led, face-to-face, true live online software training programs. It also includes access to cloud test lab with software tools. We provide live project for you to work on. We also provide assistance with mock interviews, resume preparation and review, and job placement assistance. H2K Infosys is trusted by so many students across the world. H2K Infosys provides world-class services in IT training with real-time project work for corporates and individuals, special IT training for MS students in the United States, software design, development, QA manual and automation, performance testing and maintenance, IT staff augmentation, job placement assistance, and tech support.
Folks who have joined, you could ask me if you have any doubts. Meanwhile, we'll start in 5 minutes at now. So.
Evening.
Hi. Folks ask me if you have any doubts meanwhile before we start the class.
So I'm writing some coding at least, but I have not yet done your assignment.
Okay. Folks, anyone who have finished the assignment? Manoj, Twinkle, Venkat, Yogesh, Udaynath. Venkat, somehow you're missing in the email list. Did you receive the core Java programs that I have sent you? Folks, everyone have emailed you the core Java program.
I received Venkat.
Yeah, I have also received the core Java program and interview questions.
Okay, cool, folks. If you haven't received, let me know. Maybe your email ID might not. I was searching with Venkat and I didn't get anything. So, okay, if you have received it, that's fine.
Yeah, I received it too.
Two names with Venkat, I believe, like both of, I don't know whether 2 or 3 Venkats are there, but 2 Venkats I have seen.
Oh, okay. That's it. Folks, if someone has not received the interview questions or the core Java program with us, please let me know. Manoj, are you able to hear me now? Oh, you haven't received any email, Yogesh, regarding the questions, interview questions or the core Java program? Okay. You are already enrolled for the class, right?
Yes.
Oh, Yogesh, please share your email ID. I'll send you those materials after the class. You can put it on the chat.
Yeah, okay.
It will be taken care of after the class. So, folks, everyone, if you haven't received the emails which contains the interview questions or the core Java program, please let me know.
Anega, I have sent the email with chat.
Okay, I'll check and respond back after the class. Okay, folks. Yesterday we were talking about, we have discussed the exception handling, what is an exception and an error, and handling the exceptions, right? Handling the exceptions using try and catch and using the finally block. So today we will be discussing about the keywords throw and throws. So when we have a checked exception, right? To get rid of, we have to handle the checked exception. So what do we do if we are not handling the exception, right? What else can we do when we are not handling the exception? We can put it as a throws declaration. Okay. Let's say, okay, everyone, you're able to see my screen, right? Okay. I have thread.sleep in this method, right? So what does it say? Unhandled exception type interrupted exception. It is giving me a compilation error saying to handle that exception. So folks, what is this exception? Is interrupted exception a checked exception or a runtime exception?
Exception.
Yes, this interrupted exception is a checked exception. So it's prompting us at the compilation time itself. So what can we do? We can do two things. One, if you see how to resolve this, one is surround with try catch block, which is we have already discussed it in yesterday's class to handle the exception using the try catch block. And the other is add throws declaration. So when I select, what happens? We are declaring in this method signature saying that this method might throw exception, right? So throws is the keyword. Throws is the keyword which is used to say that a method might throw exception. We are not handling the exception here, but we have the throws declaration here. So when we have the throws declaration, what happens? We are not handling the exception here, but what are we doing? We are declaring the exception here. So when someone is using this code, so folks, when someone calls this method, right, they have to handle the exception. Let's say, for instance, we are calling this method from the main method. Okay, so from here I'm calling the main method. So what is the method? It's throws exception, right? So let's say I'm calling this method. Folks, it is a static exception. So let's say I'm just calling that specific method. Okay? So it is giving me an exception, right? Here, what does it say? Unhandled exception type interrupted exception. So in throws exception method, we are not handling the exception, but whoever calls the method, right? Whoever calls that code, they have the responsibility or they have the bug of handling the exception. So even here, okay, this is the next thing. So folks, you understood the throws declaration that we do? Here, instead of handling the exception here, we are declaring that this method might throw exception. So whoever calls this method, whoever accesses this code, they have the responsibility of handling the exception. So throws is a keyword which is used to declare exceptions. So folks, we have one more keyword, throw, which is used to throw exception explicitly. So folks, how do we throw exception? Everything is an object in Java, right? So when we want to throw an exception, we have to create the exception object. So how do we create object of any class? We use the new keyword to create object of the exception class. So we create an object using the new exception and we throw the exception using the throw keyword. Here it is throwing an exception, so we are not handling it here. Let's say we are declaring the exception as we already did in the previous example. So when I call this method, when any other code calls this method, they have to implement or they have to handle the exception here. That is the difference between the keyword throw and throws. Throws is used to declare exception and throw is used to throw the exception explicitly.
What's
So
the
folks,
difference between this explicitly and implicitly.
No, not explicitly. We are throwing the exception here. Using keyword throw, we are throwing the exception. Here we are throwing the exception in the code. But here what are we doing? We are declaring the exception. Means we are saying this method might throw exception. But we are not throwing it when we do this. This particular throws exception says this method might throw exception. It is giving a warning. Let's say this method might throw exception. But here we are creating an exception object and we are throwing the exception here.
So, Neha, what is the use of throwing this exception? Like
So we throw exception when we are doing the validations. See, when for doing validation, we create our own exception. Okay, we have null pointer exception, array index out of bound, all those exceptions. We haven't created those exceptions, right?
Yes, yes.
We can create our own exception. So how do we create our own exception? We create a class by extending the exception class. And if you want to return a specific message, right? For example, I'm creating an exception to validate if a number is negative, right? I have a variable or I have a field age. Age cannot be negative, right? So I'm going to make a validation to check age should not be a negative value. So what will we do? We create a class. So folks, see here, we have created a class by extending the exception class. So if we want to create user-defined exceptions, we extend the exception class and create the user-defined exceptions or custom exceptions.
Nega, exception class is a default class?
Exception is a class that is already created by the Java people. And that is what we have discussed in yesterday's class. In the hierarchy, we have the throwable, and from which we have two subclasses, error and exception. And all the exceptions in Java are the subclasses of the exception class. Is that clear?
Okay. Okay.
So here we are creating a class by extending the exception class. So, and we are overriding the getMessage method. So that when we throw this exception, someone can get a meaningful message on why the exception is thrown, right? I have created this exception to validate a field age so that I don't want to take a negative value for age. So for example, let's say I have a user defined, I'm testing that exception. So let's say, let's make it as age for, here I have a variable age. I want to check if it is negative. If it is negative, we are throwing an exception because I want to make a validation. So I'm throwing the exception because my validation has failed. Age cannot be negative, right? So when that condition occurs or when age is less than 0, I'm throwing an exception. So see this? And I'm catching it. So what is the code that goes inside the catch block? What do we exactly want to do if an exception is thrown, right? So I want to print it to the console saying age cannot be negative. Why?
I think you created the project in 7 and you're trying to run it in 6.
Actually, I'm just wondering. Here I see JRC. Let me check the compiler version. What do I have? Folks, it is printing a meaningful message saying age cannot be negative. So what we usually do when we are developing a web application, right? In the cache block, we add it to the messages object. There will be some object which is used to show the messages for the user in the page, right? We add it to the object so that the user will be able to see these messages or the validation message. So folks, any doubts on this? Throws and creating user-defined exceptions.
Neha, I have one question.
Yes.
Basically we use throw to create our own exception.
Not to create our own exceptions, to throw exceptions. We throw after creating an object, right? We create an object and then we throw the exception.
Yes. Okay.
We don't use throw create to create an exception. Any object in Java is created using the new keyword. No matter what, exception, collection, string, any user-defined class, we use new keyword to create the object, right? Same way we use new exception to create an exception object.
Okay. And can we use throw to throw already built-in exception, or we cannot use?
We can use throw to throw any exception.
Okay.
Here, instead of saying my exception, right?
Okay.
I can throw null pointer exception also, but whatever I throw, I should be catching the same thing, right? The catch block catches the same exception or any of its subclasses, right? When I'm throwing null pointer exception, I have to catch null pointer exception, right?
Yes.
So,
okay.
Any other doubts before we move on to threads? No problem. Folks, any other doubts before we move on to threads? Any other doubts in exception handling or no? Okay. So folks, multi-threading or concurrency. So what is concurrency? Concurrency is the ability to run several parts of the program in parallel. So folks, when we use our computer, right, we have the Webex running on our machines, right? I have the Webex running in my machine, and I have Eclipse running on my machine, and I have many other things running on my machine. But I have a single processor, right? So all these programs, right, they are performed asynchronously or they are running in parallel, right? So why do we do this? In order to improve the throughput or the interactivity of the program, concurrency is used. So we have processes and threads that are running in parallel, right? So what is a process? A process is something which can run independently of any other process. And the process cannot directly access the shared data in the other process. So when we say the process is running independently, right, independent of any other process, the process does not share the access data in other processes. Let's say there will be an operating system that allocates, the resources. So what are the resources? We have the memory, we have the processor, right? For example, if a process has to run, it needs to get the CPU time, right? For example, when a process is running, the process has to get the CPU time to run, and it should be having access to the memory. So, does the process can directly access the memory? No, the process cannot directly access the memory. So, the operating system allocates these resources to the processes. And what is a thread? A thread is a lightweight process, and a thread has its own call stack, and it can access the shared data. Every thread has its own memory cache. Every thread maintains its own cache. And when a thread reads the shared data, it stores the data in its own memory cache. And in Java, when we talk about a thread, all the threads in Java are the objects of java.lang.thread. And the Java application can create new threads using this class. The class name itself is thread. When we write a Java program, it by default runs in one thread. And what is the thread? It is the main thread. Right? Whenever we write some code, when we run it, put some code in the main method and run the code as a standalone Java application, so what happens? There is by default there is one thread which is the main thread which is running the Java program. And all the threads in Java are objects of java.lang.thread. And so before we discuss about thread type, there is a concept of lock in Java. So there is no physical lock though, but each object in Java has a virtual lock. And there are certain kind of scenarios wherein we don't want multiple threads to access the same code at the same time. Or we don't want multiple threads to access the same code parallel, right? So folks, listen very carefully. Let's take an example of a joint account, right? Let's say a wife and husband have a joint account and the balance in the joint account is $100, right? Let's say I have a snippet of code wherein when someone requests for a withdrawal, folks, I'm not writing any code here, I'm just explaining. When someone wants to make a withdrawal, right? What the system checks? For example, if someone requests a $100 withdrawal, right? So, what are the steps that the system do? Folks, anyone, you can unmute and talk. So, when we make a $100 withdrawal, what does the system do?
To deduct the $100 from the balance, like the current balance.
First, it has to check if we have enough balance or not, right?
Yes.
So, there are two parts involved in it, right? One is the balance check and the other is deducting the balance, right? So, let's say folks, first, listen very carefully, this is very, very important. Let's say first, the wife comes, requests for a withdrawal of $100. So what does the system do? A thread gets initiated and it comes here, it checks the balance, right? And let's say the wife thread, let's say W is here. It checks for the balance and it is about to deduct the balance. But it has not yet deducted the balance. And what say? There is one more thread that gets initiated because of the husband also wanted to make a withdrawal of $100. So the wife thread is here. It has checked the balance. It said it's enough. So it went ahead to do the deduction of the balance, but the deduction has not yet happened. So when the husband thread comes here, it checks the balance. And now the balance is still $100, right? Because the balance is not deducted. So both the threads are permitted to make a withdrawal, which should not happen, right? Because there is only $100 in the account, right? Folks, you understand the scenario?
Yes.
Yes. If we do it like, see, when wife thread entered, we want to prevent husband thread right here. We don't want the other thread to enter it. So the wife thread, it checks the balance, it finishes the deducting balance, deduction of the balance. So the balance is now 0. When husband thread comes, when it checks the balance, it is 0 and it prevents the second thread or the husband making a withdrawal of $100, right? So what do we want to do here? Both these steps, the code to do the balance check and deducting the balance, we want to happen it as one operation. So when one thread enters this block of code, we don't want other threads to enter this code, right? You understand the scenario?
Yes.
Yes.
So this is the reason we synchronize code in Java. So what do I mean by synchronization? When I synchronize the code, that particular code can be accessed by only one thread at a time. When we synchronize the code, that particular piece of code can be accessed by only one thread at a time. So, So, we have a synchronized keyword in Java, right? when we synchronize a code, Java ensures that only a single thread can execute the block of code at the same time. So, we talked about the locking concept in Java, right? So what we do, there is a virtual lock. It's not a physical lock. It's a concept. We have a virtual lock. So every object has only one lock. And when the thread enters the synchronized block, it takes the lock with it. It has to have the lock to enter the synchronized block. So when one thread enters, it takes the lock and it keeps the lock with it until it is completely done with the synchronized code. When it is done with the synchronized code, it releases the lock. Then some other threads can take the lock and then enter the synchronized block of code. Right? So this would ensure that only one thread can enter the synchronized method at the same time. Folks, is that clear? The locking concept?
So many of our students have given testimonials on how our training programs are. You will find them on kudzu.com and on our website H2KInfosys.com. On our website H2KInfosys.com, you will also find more detailed information on who we are, the courses that we offer, what each course covers. Also, if you're interested in a demo program, please register on our homepage on the left-hand side. Just give us more information about yourself and we will send you a link for a demo class. The demo class is absolutely free. Experience our commitment by just attending an orientation workshop at no cost. Our team of faculty and advisors are here to guide you with the right information. If you still have more questions, please feel free to call us. Call us at 770-777-1269. This is a United States number. If you're calling from the UK, call us at 020-337-17615. You can also email us at training@h2kinfosys.com or h2kinfosys@gmail.com. Thank you for watching our videos. We wish you a great career in information technology.